Well, most of you would remember that in the good old so-called normal times before the pandemic and everything, in May and October 2019, we had the chance to visit the Venice Biennale together with some of our members and colleagues. And we were talking and reading a lot about the launch of a new live art program within the international exhibition and the Golden Lion Award given to a contemporary opera performance, the Lithuanian Pavilion, the pavilion's fake summer beach that hosted 90,000 visitors that had to queue for days and hours, including us with the SAHA members. Well, the performative and the spectacle have always had a place at the Venice Biennale, way before the last edition. Just to mention another award-winning pavilion by Anne Imhoff that represented Germany in the German pavilion in 2017 with her fashionable, quite a different style, post-apocalyptic and provocative even durational performance titled Faust. There were many other performances within the exhibitions and the national pavilions in the last edition of the Venice Biennale, including Pavilion of Turkey. Indeed, our first guest speaker of these talks, SAHA Talks on Performance, was Ince Wiener, the artist, and she made an excellent keynote speech, sharing her perspective both as an artist and a critical mind, and as a scholar teaching performative at the university. And 2 weeks ago, we hosted the amazing Perform Istanbul team. I see Simge and Azra today with us, in conversation with two of SAHA's founders, collectors of performance and live art, and two emerging performers from Turkey. Today, we are thrilled to be able to welcome Aaron, a dear friend, member of our advisory board, and the director of a long-time partner institution in London. In one of his interviews as the co-curator of the Venice Biennale's official performance art program, Aaron says, and here I quote, "Performance doesn't fit within the very easy economic prison that the art world is still working with." And another quote, "In a way, it offers something completely different for viewers, and it strengthens the capacity for people to see or to understand what bigger issues are at play, because the body is present," end of quote. As certain theorists suggest that we are now in the age of experiences, hence the experiential term, I'm sure today we will understand better in this third talk why and how not only established major art events like the Venice Biennale or other biennials, museums, and even art fairs, but also one of the most prominent residency programs, like the Delfina Foundation that Aaron leads, put the spotlight on performance art more and more. My colleague Zeynep, our event coordinator, will moderate today's program with Aaron and two great artists, Sena and Murat, as I need to apologize once again for my sore throat. Aaron, thank you for today, and Zeynep, please.
Thank you, Çelenk, and I'd like to also welcome everybody, guests and members of SAHA and our dear beloved guests. So I'll just make a quick introduction of our guests, Aaron, Sena, and Murat, before I leave the word to Aaron for the program. So just to give you a little bit more information on Aaron Cezar. Aaron Cezar studied economics and dance from Princeton University and a postgraduate degree in creative industries from King's College London. And since Delfina's foundation in 2007, he develops, curates, and oversees its program. And apart from co-curating the 58th Venice Biennale performance program, he works across regions and borders and produced projects for Hayward Gallery, Art Bogota, Art Dubai, Art Jamil, amongst many others. And he's also a writer. He has published writings at the Art Newspaper, Harper's Bazaar, and Art Asia Pacific. But he also was awarded an honorary fellowship from RCA. And lastly, he has been selected for the panel of the next Turner Prize taking place in 2021. And today we also have two of Delfina's former residents supported by SAHA, Sena and Murat. So I'll give a little bit more information on Sena first. Sena studied economics at Boğaziçi and then an MFA at Bard College. And her work investigates healing processes after cases of trauma, and she focuses on subjects such as death, regeneration, renewal, and liberation. And Sena participated the residency program at Delfina Foundation last year in 2020, returning just before the pandemic, actually. And she worked on a new performance during that time that activates an archive, which we'll talk about today, and we're very happy to hear from her personally. But this new performance will premiere at a performance festival, hopefully next year in London, called Block Universe. And we also have, very lastly, Murat today, who went to Delfina Foundation's residency program in 2018 with SAHA support. And Murat holds an MFA in visual arts from School of Art Institute of Chicago, and he currently pursues a PhD in London at Goldsmiths. And as a Turkish-German artist, he creates performance-based work that investigates relationships and frictions between spatiality and explores the potential of movement. And during his time at Delfina, he spent almost about 3 months. He developed a concept of camouflage and exploring self through space. And we'll be able to, again, hear from him personally today. So before I leave the word to Aaron, before further ado, I'd just like to make a quick reminder that we'll be having a conversation and a Q&A at the very end. So if you could keep your microphones on mute until then, and we'll have a nice conversation. And we'd of course love you to leave your cameras on. It's always nice to see each other. And so thank you. And I'd like to leave the floor, the Zoom floor, to Aaron right now. And I'm just, yes.
Great.
Hi, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Zeynep, and thank you so much, Çelenk. I'm really so pleased to be with all of you today. As was mentioned, Delfina Foundation has worked with SAHA since, I think, 2013, supporting some 9 or 10 residencies and projects. And I'm actually very honored to be part of your International Advisory Council. For those of you who don't know me, I think it's important and relevant to this conversation to talk about how I came to the visual arts from dance. Here are some old photos that I recently found, and I just partially wanted to show them off. But they're from my time at Princeton when I studied dance and economics. And then later at King's College, London, I was able to bring both sides of my brain together through the pursuit of a master's in the creative industries. Over the last few years, though, I've been reconsidering my background as a dancer and choreographer again, and thinking about curating as a choreographic kind of practice, because curating, like choreographing, deals with time, space, with objects or props, light, sound, and most importantly, the body, as we talked about earlier, how a body moves in a space or an exhibition, as well as the notion of embodiment. So I've taken on my role at Delfina more like a choreographer, creating relationships between different ideas, people, communities, and partners like SAHA. Here are some images of Delfina Foundation for those of you who haven't had the chance to visit. In this house, we run an interrelated residency and public program that is divided into the 4 seasons of the year. So 1 or 2 seasons are dedicated to open research, but a majority of our programs are uniquely centered on themes. And our themes provide a gathering point for the internal discussions among our international artists, but they also provide a framework for our external activities through public events, programming, and partnerships. Our recurring themes include several main subject areas like the politics of food. I'm going to get it over here. And here's an image of some of the programming around our Politics of Food program, and a little shout out to Aisha Umar, who helped us produce our Politics of Food book. Our second theme relates to the public domain, which looks at how the notion of public space, both in the physical and virtual sense. Collecting as practice, which investigates the politics, psychology, and philosophy of collecting. And it's a program that's included collectors in residence. Here are some of the names of some of the previous collectors, including Haro Kabuzian from Turkey. Science, technology, and society. And lastly, performance as process, which is what I want to focus on today. However, performance underpins a lot of our work at Delphina Foundation. We consider performance as a way of interpreting the world around us. We look broadly at how the concept of performativity can be applied to everyday life, from social and religious rituals that mark the passing of time to the performance of the stock market, which drives our economic system. In his essay, Dimensions of Performance, theorist Jonah Westerman states that performance is not a medium, but a set of questions and concerns about how art relates to people and society. In line with Westerman's argument, our program explores performance as processing the world. Through our residencies, we have developed and presented artworks in which meaning is created through different strategies, including reenactment, embodiment, and public engagement. The outcomes have not just taken on the form of live actions, but objects, video, installation that we consider to be performative, and how they are either produced, experienced, or interpreted. So many of the works that we developed kind of shape and they subvert our bodily experience. And through doing so, they produce new forms of knowledge. I've been sharing a few examples of previous residency projects, but I wanted to drill down into just two before I hand over the floor to Murat to speak. The first is Mosat, who is an artist from Burma or Myanmar, whose work explores self, identity, embodiment, and political resistance. He is part of a generation of experimental Burmese artists who overcame government censorship and oppression to engage with conceptual works that deal with the body and identity. Now, Myanmar is very much in the news kind of like this week following the military coup, which happened on Monday. I actually wanted to talk about Mo before the developments in Myanmar, so it's just kind of become quite topical. But in any case, during Mo's residency, he revisited a work produced 10 years ago called Face and Fingers. And it's a series of choreographed sequence of hand and facial gestures based on those that he observed on the streets of Yangon, illustrating the ways in which people communicate non-verbally with their bodies, and how they hold emotion, and how they also hold the weight of living, particularly when it's during a time when it's forbidden to express oneself fully, which is actually happening right now in Myanmar yet again. In this new iteration of the work, Mo expanded it from being a solo performance to being one that engaged three people, three performers, and he wanted to work with different kinds of bodies, so with the male, female, and a queer body. At Delphina, many artists use their residencies to reflect on their practice, as Mo did, while others try to learn new skills, especially those who work with performance. Most recently, the Nigerian artist Sheila Chukwulazi spent her residency learning pole dancing for a new work. And she's looking at pole dancing in relation to the post-colonial body, and also religion and restraints that religion brings, particularly Catholicism, on the body. That work is still in development. So instead, I wanted to show you the work of a Brazilian artist called Luisa Nobrega, who used her residency to take classical singing lessons and also British Sign Language lessons. The artist is hearing impaired herself. And as a result, she's interested in communication failures, particularly what gets lost between the voice and between gestures. During her residency, she wanted to see what would happen if she learned and then combined these two contradictory systems at once, singing and signing, and how each could cross-contaminate each other. In this 8-hour performance, the artist projected 2 videos on the stairs of the Delphina house. In one of them, a deaf woman is using British Sign Language to tell the story of how she survived a tsunami. And in the other, a soprano sings a song by Claude Debussy entitled The Ecstasy. The artist sat with headphones for 8 hours, attempting to imitate the signing of the deaf woman and the singing of the soprano at the same time. She wanted to see how singing and signing would merge after hours of exhaustive repetition, what mistakes would be made in imitating each, and how language often comes to the verge of collapsing when it attempts to translate such extreme experiences like confronting a tsunami or being in ecstasy. So this, again, was an 8-hour performance in which started 4 hours before the audience arrived, and then it ended after the audience left. Now, there's always this question around durational works, about whether they're meant to be seen in their entirety and how they're documented. For Louisa, for this artist, she likes actions that can't be fully experienced or documented by an audience. And even if it is, it's almost unbearable to watch, because very much the process of performance for her is embodying the work itself. It's a performance first and foremost, I think, for her. So our residencies at Delphina have been an opportunity for artists to produce research and experiment with new ideas. And I want to turn now to Murat, Adash, to tell us about his experience at Delphina. He was supported by SAHA and participated in our performance as process program in 2018. So I'm going to hand over to Murat now.
Thank you, Erin. Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, we
great.
can. Hi.
Hi, everyone. So first, Erin, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me today. And I also just wanted to take just a quick opportunity to say thank you to the entire SAHA family for making, even possible for me to be, for me having been able to experience the Delphina Foundation, because it was a really truly special. I mean, I don't think there's any residency program that compares. So, and this is thanks to Aaron and his wonderful team. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I just wanted to quickly share just a few ideas of what I actually did during my residency. And then I'm just gonna share a couple of very quick excerpts. And so my residency took the form of a performative research body, meaning that it was kind of figured through both a research practice and one that then kind of led to a couple choreographic movement-based works. And this project kind of revolved around the concept of camouflage that Zeynep earlier mentioned. And I've been working around this concept since for the past 2 years, 3 years almost. And so at that time I was drawing my understanding of this kind of chameleonic phenomenon through the context of biology, that is thinking through animal and insect mimicry. And so I produced 2 choreographic works during the residency. They were both shown at the Open Studios. One was a live performance and the other a moving image work. They were both interconnected. And they kind of reconfigured, or I attempted to reconfigure camouflage as both a performance strategy, as well as a kind of spatial act. So I'm understanding it kind of spatially in that sense. So I worked with a group of performers, 11 exactly, to kind of develop, let's say, a kind of somatic understanding of camouflage. And the idea of it was to kind of open it up as an instance in which, the self, let's say in the most general sense of self and world, but also we could go into specifics of, each subjectivity having their own specifics, but in this sense, just in a general sense, thinking through how the self both physically transforms through its embodiment of, as well as contact with its exterior world, and that kind of reciprocal sort of dynamic that exists between bodies and spaces in that sense. So I'm just going to go quickly to share my screen, and I'll just share I'll just show a minute of each. All right, so let me I'm just gonna share my desktop, I think that would be the easiest. Can you see?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I will share part 1 first, which was a moving image, and I'll just share a minute, and then I will share part 2. Okay, sorry for the abrupt. I'm just going to play back a minute of the part 2, which was then a live performance in the gallery. Okay, I will just stop here. And I will hand over to you.
Well, Murat, I would like to hear you talk about how that work developed, because it's already kind of in where you left us. It's just like suspension, right? Where you see the performers are beginning to take up space and to kind of, in a way, direct the audience in a very subtle way and carve out their own space, but it grows and grows and grows, this work, almost like you create like this human line of bulldozers, effectively, to kind of come through the space, sweeping through it and interacting with kind of with other bodies. Could you talk a little bit more about how it continues?
Yeah, so in a sense, I think this work also had to do, like all my works, and the continuation of that, with sort of spatial kind of, sort of figure ground relations and demarcation and kind of spatial embodiment. I think in this work, there were kind of these, let's say, more confrontative elements that were sort of articulated through the performer group. I think what happened from there onwards is actually quite a big change actually happened since then, Erin. I don't think we actually spoke since then, because I sort of reintroduced my own body in my work again. And I did that after a 10-year period of working only with performers. So I did a kind of an institutional show in 2019 where I performed a duet with a dancer, actually. And it was kind of similarly in that sense, where the audience were asked to come and sit in the middle under a light projection, but the light projection was kind of coded in such a way that it was very slowly dimming over a duration of 30 minutes. So it was almost inconceivable, the kind of transition from light to darkness. And then with that kind of demarcating a space at the same time that is in itself kind of disappearing upon the people that are actually making that island. And we were sort of moving in and out of these bodies, kind of continuously, camouflaging ourselves and moving in and out. So I think maybe in that sense, it was a continuation of that, but it's somehow, it's developed quite a bit, because this camouflage research I'm doing also as part of an artistic PhD. So it has kind of discursive elements and written elements, but I would say in the terms of practice, I developed this kind of new body of work that I call correspondence. And so I just did the third iteration of it, actually in Istanbul, just in November. Maybe some people might know the Marina Abramovic exhibition that was on at Sakıp Sabancı Müzesi, and this was actually my first solo performance. So it's kind of really shifted in that sense, also in terms of my own body. And I think the somatic kind of choreographic sort of elements became more invested in, I would say, over the past couple, 3 years.
Great. It's nice to kind of like hear how that development has begun. And how are you holding up during the pandemic?
Good. You know, I mean, for me, I've had a lot of cancellations, but some shows kind of went ahead. I'm also, as I said, I'm doing a PhD at the moment. So I kind of took the time to just really focus on kind of that, because I sort of put it aside for a little while. So I've been doing writing, and, you know, I can't complain. I have a good setup here in London, and I'm working from home, and I'm kind of planning ahead. So there's things kind of in the future, and some other things are on hold. So, but I wouldn't say that I'm less busy than before. I would actually say the contrary. I feel like even more busy right now, because just everything is online, and so so yeah, I would say I'm busy, and I'm doing well personally. I'm okay.
So happy to hear that. Thank you so much, Murat.
I'm gonna leave because I have to go. I'm teaching today, so I just wanted to say thank you, and
thank you so much for joining us today, Murat. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. And Aaron, see you soon, Çelenk.
And soon.
Thank you, Murat. See you soon.
Murat, thank you so much. I was really curious about what you did in Delfina, and it's a great opportunity for us who couldn't see it there. Thank you so much. And Aaron, as always, you were such an inspirational, always an inspiration in Delfina. Thank you so much for the motivation and inspiration to the artists that we collaborated over the years. Thank you, Murat. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Füsun, and everybody for, you know, enabling this for the artists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Murat.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
So I will now turn to focus on some of the larger projects that we have initiated at Delfina Foundation. The first is Staging Histories, which is a research project into performance art from the Arab world. Delfina has focused a lot on the Middle East over the last decade, as many of you will know. And despite supporting a number of Arab performance artists, I was surprised to learn there's no word for performance art in the Arabic language. There is an Arabic word for performance, but not for performance art as a concept. So I wanted to look at the genesis of performance art in the Arab region. To launch the program, we staged 2 exhibitions. One exhibition included video documentation and archival material that charted performative practices around 3 critical periods. Each were marked by significant events, from the first Gulf War and Tiananmen Square to 9/11, the Intifadas and the invasion of Iraq, to the Arab Spring and the Occupy movements. So the selected works in the show were presented as a preface, as a consequence, or an echo of some of these major political and cultural movements as they related to the Arab world and the Arab world's relationship with the rest of society. The works largely focus on a notion of performance as an alternative form of historic record. So keeping track of stories that were not told and not put in any other kind of official record. The second exhibition took place, at the Hayward Gallery in their performance space. And it looked at, particularly at sound, the role of sound in recording and rewriting history through oral storytelling, through music, and through field recordings. As mentioned before, we have this thematic approach at Delfina Foundation, and we have one program, Performance as Process, as a discrete focus, but performance runs through all of our themes. Most notably, it runs through our Politics of Food program, where we have staged countless dinner performances. It's impossible to talk about food, politics, and performance without mentioning the Futurist movement. which rejected the past and called for this aggressive push towards the future. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, who founded the movement, also wrote a manifesto for futurist cookery, which called for a range of changes to food, some incredibly funny, like a ban on pasta, because pasta makes you heavy after you eat it. And if you're heavy, you're slow. And if you're slow, you can't advance towards the future. He called for the removal of tableware and the return to the tactile pleasures of eating. He envisioned new forms of food that pleased the eyes before the tongue, perfumes to be paired with dishes, taking away music and conversation from the meals just to focus on food, or to have food that stimulated your imagination and your desire, but not necessarily fueled your appetite. Now, there are some very memorable applications of these theories, but the first was a futurist dinner that took place on the 8th of March, 1931. Many artists' dinner performances are a legacy of those early meals by the futurists, which later inspired the surrealists, and on and on. I conceived one of Delfina Foundation's largest dinner performances that brought together many dishes, drinks, and performances into the framework of a wedding. This project was called the Wedding Project. Very simple. It was staged at Art Dubai and commissioned by their project section. And the concept emerged from the fact that the venue for the art fair is normally used for weddings. So I wondered what it would feel like if the two came crashing together. What would happen if an art fair crashed a wedding and a wedding crashed an art fair? The meal was a banquet for 80 people, and it was constructed as a mishap. So once the guests arrived for dinner, they watched what they thought was a live feed of the arrival of the bride and groom to the venue. But instead of turning right to go into the banquet hall, the bride and groom turns left, and instead they go into the art fair. The banquet dinner continues, and there's this like anticipation that the bride and groom are going to arrive. There's even a head table set up for the bride and groom. But once guests start eating and drinking, they forget about the bride and groom, perhaps just like a real wedding. Meanwhile, the bride and groom are in the fair, meeting gallerists and taking selfies with guests at the fair. The dinner consisted of 11 courses, and each course was inspired by a different word for love that exists in the Arabic language. And this comes from an 11th century text that I found. And each word for love expressed almost like a different stage. So from the beginning of love, which is infatuation, or hawa in Arabic, to insanity, the end of love, when it's all consuming and you can't just get enough of it. It's driving you mad. So the 11 courses weren't all food. Like sometimes it was a drink or some kind of performative action. So for example, guests were welcome into this edible garden, which is a work by the artist Sanoj D, which was the source of ingredients for the starters. So guests would actually forage from this edible garden for their third course of the meal. The seventh course was bread, and it was a work by an artist called Mateus Rocapita. It was a bread that was inside of the bread was encased 1 pound of sand from the Emirati desert, and it related to a story of grief, since the seventh stage of love is grief, and also a story of fertility and loss, being that this was for a wedding. The 8th stage of love is called enslavement. And we realize a recipe here by the artist Candice Lin for beggar's chicken, which is a Chinese dish in which chicken is cooked in clay. In this case, we use sculpting clay, and we invited art students to sculpt the faces of the most powerful people of the art world, according to Art Review, kind of in that year. So in order to eat the chicken, guests had to smash open and consume these people, as well as their power. So it was very fun to have these art students kind of sculpting, who are the next generation, sculpting those who stand in their way, so, and it's just kind of funny analogy around that. The culmination of the evening centered on the Arabic word for disorder, which is a stage of love that causes one to lose all sense of reason. The artist Taus Makasheva reimagined one of the most anticipated moments in any traditional wedding, the cake. In this case, it was a multi-tiered sculpture of wood that looked like a cake and offered limited edition slices for guests to take home. But in keeping with the notion of disorder, the cake was not edible. You know, it was wood, as I just said, but everything else was. So the plate, the napkin, the fork and knives are made out of marzipan, chocolate, and marshmallow. And it was also this play on words that, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. In this case, you could have your cake, but you couldn't consume it, but you could consume everything else. Now from Dubai, we'll go to Venice. And I'll wrap up here and then we'll have another short conversation with Sena. As Çelenk and Zeynep mentioned earlier, I was invited by Ralph Rugoff to co-curate the official performance program in the Venice Biennale in 2019. I'm going to switch images here so I can show you a little bit of a slideshow. Wait, 1 second. Sorry. Slideshow, there we go. While performance has been a highlight of many national pavilions, as was mentioned earlier, Lithuania, Germany, Turkey, rarely has performance been part of the international exhibition and public program. So this was a major opportunity. And I was asked to develop 2 programs, one for the opening week and another for the final weekend of the Biennale. Each program expanded the theme of the central exhibition, which was, May You Live in Interesting Times. I think we can all agree that title could have also been the title of 2020 and maybe even part of 2021 with the pandemic as it is. But in any case, what we're attempting to do with the theme, May You Live in Interesting Times, was to highlight art and artistic approaches that fall outside of accepted categories, or those that are hybrid and can't fit in anywhere. While it was a diverse program, the connection between all of the artists was their use of performance to create images and narratives that don't exist in mainstream culture. Those stories that fall in between or outside. The artists interrogated identity politics through the concepts of nationality, through gender, and through intersectionality. They also considered the notion of representation and how language, as articulated through the body and through the voice, can reaffirm or refuse conventions and traditions. During the opening week in May, we were able to use the gardens of the Giardini and the Arsenale, as you can see here, in ways that had not really been done before, with audiences unexpectedly encountering performance. During the final weekend, we moved indoors because of the colder weather, but also the epic floods that had just taken place in Venice. In total, there were 15 works, around 40 performances that were staged. Our most ambitious work was by the American artist Solange Knowles. While Solange is known for being Beyonce's sister and a Grammy award-winning musician herself, Solange has a wider practice that encompasses text, movement, design, and visual art. She creates a confluence of ideas and imagery that explores the politics of the Black female body. And I'm sorry we don't have any images of Solange's work. They are still on embargo for another 3 weeks because we're producing something with it. But I can tell you that over 4 days in Venice, right after the epic flooding, Solange created this work live in the Arsenale with 7 musicians, 2 dancers, 2 singers, 6 dancers, and 16 young Black women from all across Europe who we flew in. And they were called the gatekeepers. And these young women, for many of them, it was an opportunity to share concerns and experiences of being young, Black, and in Europe. And they were not simply extras in the work. Solange made the work for them. And on a continent that is grappling with post-colonial politics and migration crises, these young Black women were given agency and visibility. It was interesting because the theater for the work was next to the wreckage of the migrants' boat, in which so many Black and brown bodies lost their lives trying to migrate to Europe. I'm sure many of you saw the ship, was sitting there on the edge of the Biennale, but without much context, as if those poor souls, didn't matter. But in Solange's work, those Black bodies, those female gatekeepers were not marginalized. They were empowered. They were very much part of the work. And it's kind of fitting that we ended the slideshow on this work by Zaidi Ka. This is a performance in a Giardini, because there's certainly a parallel between Zaidi's work and Solange's work, which was in the Arsenale, about the role of women in society and the notion of kind of caring and strength that comes kind of like from them. And I think that's also a very fitting place to stop talking about Venice and to hand over to Sena to talk about her work, which very much relates to some of these themes. So Sena, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for inviting me to this talk. And just like Murat, I would like to thank SAHA too for making my experience at the Alfina Foundation possible. I had a very fruitful artistic research phase completed there in January and February. The outcome, the final fruit of this process was to be performed at Block Universe Festival in May. But, because of the pandemic now, it's postponed. I would like to share my screen too, just a second. Yes, I think it's working. I have a mini slideshow. And the full screen, yes. So I have a short presentation on how I incorporate performance in my work. And I will also talk about what I did at the Alfina Foundation last year. I started making my first videos in the office that I was working at. Zeynep just introduced me and she said that I studied economics first, and I was working in a finance job after my graduation. And in the office space, I was feeling alienated to this 9-to-6 job and this huge business plaza and the constraint of this space. So I was using performance as a way to resist to the constraint of the space. The space was imposing on our bodies how to move, what to do, when, and performance was a way to resist for me at that time. And I started making videos of these performances. There's a series of diary-like performative videos from this period. I swim in the office space, I sleep in the office space, there are like fancying women in the office space. All these acts that challenge the constraint of the space took place. And my practice in general is on healing after cases of trauma and care. And this whole expressive process was healing for me in the beginning when my practice first started in the office space. Later on, I started to use performance again in a similar manner, actually. I used performance to take back or heal what has already taken place, what has already happened. These two stills are from creative documentary film that I made in 2014 called Time Worm. The film takes place in a village called Adash in Kulp, Diyarbakir. And the film deals with the trauma of the 90s in this region. And the silkworm's life is a metaphor that I used in the film. The children of the village performed in the film. There is documentary footage of the daily life and all, but also the children of the village reenacted the life of the silkworm, how they regenerate every year, how their lives are interrupted so suddenly right before they turn into moths, but then how they regenerate every year became a metaphor for healing and regeneration in the region. Currently, I'm interested in scenarios of the end of the world as we know it, let's say. And this is due to global warming mainly. But the political atmosphere in Turkey is also a big influence, I have to say. And the recent pandemic only intensified my obsession, let's say, with the end, actually, scenarios of the end. And I've been making work exploring how to approach, how to face this end, you know, how to face these ruins of the future, let's say. And my work in Delfina, this still is from, again, a video film on the end. Here we see the sun falling down, dying, let's say. The end of the universe they are talking about at this very moment in the film. But my proposal with Delfina was also dealing with the end. I thought of our time, our relationship with time as akin to skiing downhill in full speed. You know, the end approaching us, or we are approaching the end. And on the other side of the story, there are the archives. Like human beings have been preserving information. And when people talk about global warming, when we look at you know, scientific research, we see that there is a very limited time remaining to make a change, to turn back the damage, or to save the, you know, future, let's say. On the other hand, we have all these preserved, stored, frozen information. I worked with the question, how can we activate this information to make it useful? How can we change this grim end in a way? So my work takes place in a site-specific manner, in an archive space, and I'm thinking about mapping the archive space with slalom poles. There will be 3 performers, one of whom is me. And, you know, in the alpine skiing practice, slaloming, the slalom skier makes turns in a very skillful way while he or she is going really fast. In order to take these turns, one has to be very skillful and slow down in a skillful manner, but has to still continue this fast pace. So I thought about this performance mimicking the movement of slalom skiers, moving in such a way, in a skillful way, while reciting parts of an archive, a text I prepared using the information in the archive. So this work is still in progress, and I hope I will be able to realize it soon. In my research phase at Delfina, I was visiting many archives on healing, and I talked to archivists, and just like Murat said, Delfina has been very supportive during this research, and I guess that's it from me for now.
Thank you so much, Sena. It's great to see you again, first of all, and to kind of see how the work has developed. It's very unfortunate, I mean, that we weren't able to stage the performance this year, given the pandemic. But we do look forward to working with Block Universe and staging it next year. That is the end of our presentations. I know that Zeynep had questions. I thought maybe I'll hand over to Zeynep, because in the interest of time, to kind of get questions from the group, and then both Sena and I can respond to them.
Yes, of course. So I think before we kind of go on to the question and answer phase, I just wanted to thank you again for this very inspirational talk. And it, you know, sparked so many ideas, and it's very interesting to always, you know, feel and understand performance as something that's so inherent within us. And I just wanted to add like 2 notes coming from my personal experience, both in in accordance with your talk, Erin, but also with Sena's. And first one is that I worked with Rickard Travanesia back in the States. And I mean, he's, famous for his free curry at 1992 at 303 Gallery. And I was at a studio for about 6 months. And during my time there, I spent most of my time working with him up in upstate New York. And we inaugurated this kitchen alongside a gallery. And we were just cooking and cooking and cooking all the time. And the only dish that we still served was the free curry. And everything else, we were open only for the weekends. And everything else was just, you had to pay. But still, in order to activate the work, people had to get out of their habitual roles and, you sort of become someone more than a spectator. So without having that active participation, it was just, it felt so mesmerizing to be able to sort of realize that, and to sort of feel that actually it's just so inherent, something so ritualistic and something so domestic is actually in there, without any efforts. And the other thing was in relation to Sena's, it just reminded me of, I studied in London too, and I studied fine art. And in one of my visits to the Whitechapel, Pedro Reyes had this big sanatorium work that he showcased dealing with healing. But so maybe actually I do have a question, so I can just also perhaps ask my question too. But how does it feel like to work on healing? Because it's a very loaded and a very heavy concept. And I know that you also work on death and renewal and regeneration, and they're sort of also very contradictory. So you touch upon these two, but they're very, I was just wondering how you cope with that.
In a way, life is not separate from death. So lightness comes with heaviness,
Yeah.
and these are always together. And my approach is trying to find a way to make it lighter, or try to offer an experimental resolution, let's say. So I usually don't end up in a grim place, but try to, but a lot of it ends up in acceptance of death too. When you talk about care and life and regeneration, you also have to talk about that and the end. And I'm always trying to find new ways. To be honest, right now, since I'm obsessed with the end, I'm thinking the end has not happened yet, right?
Yeah.
Of something that hasn't taken place yet. I need a change of terminology in these days.
Yeah. So much is still coming through, as day goes by, we're still exploring so much of ourselves, but also with the world. So I guess performance is really understanding the world and beyond.
Performance is not only expressing that you're acting, so
yeah,
really empowering in a way too.
Yeah.
I think that's why I found Jonah Westerman's text so inspiring to me, to try and not think of performance as a medium, because then it feels like if it's a medium, it feels like it's limited to only certain people. Maybe it's only limited to artists, right? Whereas if you think about a set of questions and a set of concerns that we have about the world and how we negotiate them, then we see performance embedded within everything, within every aspect of everyday life. I'm even playing a role now of presenter, and you're playing the role of audience, who are there.
Absolutely.
All these roles being played out. And within all this, of course, there is too the body that's part of this. And I think what's so precious about kind of Sena's work is that a lot of her work is kind of quite subtle, right? In terms of how it approaches the body, about the fragility of the body and repairing the body. And it gives you another kind of way in terms of thinking about kind of vulnerability, which we all have. We all have vulnerabilities. We all have kind of concerns. And I think in many ways, that's why performance can be quite relatable, even if it's dealing with complex kind of topics, because the body at the end of the day is what's at stake, is often the body.
So yeah, maybe I can just add to that and ask my question to you, Erin, as well. So, because I know that, and you mentioned that, you come from a dance background. And I was wondering, I mean, still you are, apart from the being, having the title as a director of Dafina, but you are a creative, and you're doing, you're all around the world and doing so many amazing projects. But I just wonder how you, and I'm sure that you have this your passion for dance. How do you feed that, that longing? How does that, what do you do for that? Because you are an artist too in that sense.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting. I think that's why I've kind of started to look at kind of like curating as being a form of choreography, and I think kind of within kind of the act of kind of curating and dancing, you're dealing with the same kind of material that one would kind of in any art form, as it were. You're dealing with light, sound, context, but when you have practice and then you work as a producer, I think you have a strength because you're able to really support artists in realizing their ideas. And this was very evident in the work in Venice, the artists that we selected, and the feedback from the artists about how much care and attention that we at Delfina was able to kind of give them when they had this huge kind of responsibility of delivering a work in the Venice Biennale, but having our support. And so coming from that kind of that place of being a performer, I could kind of very much kind of relate to them. But at the same time, it's frustrating too, because sometimes you get involved and you have an opinion about something. You have to like work out, negotiate how much, how to plant a seed with someone, with an artist in its stage of production that can flourish on its own, that you're not fully directing, because it is not your work. You are the curator, you are the producer. There's a role that you also have to take, at the same time. So the negotiation is tough sometimes in terms of producing kind of works collaboratively.
Thank you so much. And I think I've spoken too much. So I just wanted to open the floor also for our members. Anybody who wants to have a question, if you could I'm surveying the cameras. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and I'll be happy to assist as well. And I'm just browsing if anybody has a question. Nazlı has a question.
Actually, you have mentioned the talk through with the examples from the previous performances, but how do you think, it's both for Sena and for you, Erin, how do you think performance contributes to artistic engagement and awareness with the general public?
Very, very good question. I think there's an incredible role for performance, particularly in the context of museums. And I think we're witnessing this now, how there's much more of an employment of performance within the context of collections being used to kind of animate them and to attract new audiences for them. I do think there's an incredible opportunity to access the benefits of performance to appeal to a much larger public, because participation is so inherent within it. Even if you're not the performer, as a viewer, as an audience member, you're in some way part of that experience. You're embodying the sound, you're embodying the images. And I think it's naturally like changing and remapping your mind at the same time. But then also works that are participatory, that works that engage an audience, have an ability of really kind of connecting and helping people to kind of, not helping, but bringing people along the same journey, I think with you. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of going forth once we emerge from the pandemic and we're able to kind of gather and have these experiences again. But I think we are going to turn strongly to performance, strongly to kind of like the body, to those acts of kind of connecting on a kind of humane level, and looking at the body as a way of animating objects, things that are static and still, that are in a way kind of like produced and maybe even trapped in a certain time. Performance can create a whole new narrative kind of around them and bring them forth and even create a possible future for them. So I do think there's an incredible opportunity that we will, for performance artists. It's just that under the current conditions, it is a travesty that so many performance artists who work in performance have been struggling at this time because everything is stopped, and particularly kind of like for performance where it's about people gathering, in the same space, are just not permissible. So I do hope that we emerge from the pandemic soon, and that we are able to kind of support a lot of artists who work with performance right afterwards, because they're going to need the support.
Thank you very much, Erin.
So I'm browsing if anybody has further questions, any questions from our members. And I'm just looking at Lala as well, if she received any questions.
A good point to say that we put a lot of great links in the chat, which kind of spark some of the, which are iterations of some of the works that I talked about in my proposal. Also, our platform on our website is great because we have very short 2 to 3 minute videos on many of the artists and projects that we've done. So it's a great resource.
Yes, and I'll be sharing those after the program as well. So yeah, but just looking, any questions?
I want to ask you, we were discussing the other week with, when we made another session with Simge and her group, and we were talking about documentation and performance art. What are your opinions on that? I'm really curious about that.
I'll give my opinion as like a curator, and I'll let Sena talk about kind of as an artist. There's no one kind of singular answer to that question, because it often does depend on the artist and the artwork. It's often led by the artist, and as you probably discussed already last week, there's such differences of opinion. If you think of someone like Cezar, where nothing is written down, it's all translated kind of like word of mouth. To Luisa Nobrega, who I mentioned earlier, who creates performances that can't be documented, and if they were, you wouldn't want to watch them, because that's kind of her kind of like view kind of on documentation. As a curator and as a one who's done work exhibitions that have looked at the histories of performance, I find documentation, even if it's rubbish, even if it's unbearable to watch, so important to understanding history, because I do think performance is an alternative way of recording history. Certain kind of narratives that just weren't written down, but maybe artists captured them through song, through storytelling, through live art. There's so many different ways in which performative can kind of capture kind of like kind of those histories. So I think it's vitally important that it exists somewhere, even if maybe there's parameters around its exhibition. Like if an artist does not like performance documentation to be shown, okay, that's there. But for history's sake, it's important for that it's captured. Sena?
It is a very interesting question for me too, because I rarely perform live. The performance I'm working for at Delphina is a live performance, but as I started performing, I was documenting. I was making performative videos or performance for video, let's say, however you would call it. To be honest, I'm not a natural performer. I hate public speaking and being on stage. I only do this when I feel a very strong need to, and documenting it, video came natural to me. Before this, I was doing paintings and collages, so I don't know, that's how I felt comfortable, let's say. But I believe in the power of here and now, and live performance definitely is just not my style. When I started making bigger projects, films, I got support from the Ministry of Culture. Then you work with a film crew, and they have their own tradition they want to bring to the creative space. They have rules about how things should be, and they want everything planned, like pre-planned, clearly. Like you make a storyboard and then you shoot it. I understood through this process that doesn't work for me too. I'm somewhere in the middle. I have to be open to change during the shooting process. Therefore, I found a solution of working with smaller teams, like just a camera person and me usually. And we shoot, we look at it, we change again. I believe in process, I incorporate it in my work, just like live performance is not always my
So you want the intimacy for yourself and yeah, during that thought process or performing process. But on the other hand, for the audience, we are at the other side. For the audience, I believe it is so essential to see the documentation, even if the experience is so different, being immersed in that experience is so important, but still in order to have an opinion, for instance, for warming up people, for the audience, so few art audience, such a little fragmentation of them knows perform or follows performing arts. So for the ordinary audience, it's also essential to have the sense of it. It is impossible for us, for instance, if I have seen something and I want to tell and just share that experience, it's impossible to tell. But if there is a documentation, it helps, I believe. And I hope they are not that much against in documenting it. That's great to hear that, Sena, you're not among them. And Aaron, you're also, that's great. Yeah.
I mean, obviously some artists are against it because they feel like it is a very special, unique experience. But I think that I hope that what has also happened over this last year of the pandemic, of us having to gather like this, I think it's changed all of our feelings towards kind of like online experiences, watching things that you can experience in the flesh in real life, because we're now forced into this kind of like way of thinking. But like remember when we do a panel discussion before, if you had to Skype someone into a talk, it was the worst thing ever. Like you hear the communication would go down and it just wouldn't be the same kind of experience. Now we don't think twice about this, and it doesn't matter if the video's bad or the sound's bad. CNN, the major news channel, have people who have like really crappy, stuff, technologies. But so maybe there's a threshold that's also kind of been crossed a little bit now in terms of this. We'll see.
A new era,
yeah. I mean, obviously there's a whole other thing about collecting performance, which I know we're not going to get into now, but that also relies on good documentation or relies on that experience, right? Of collecting that experience versus collecting like the remains of it, depending on the artist, of course.
Yeah. No, thank you.
And I'm actually, here. I was just, looking at you, Simge and Azra, if you wanted to add anything to the conversation, and I just saw your hand. So
yeah, actually about the live art collection, beside the documentation as an archival process, what do you think about live art collection? I mean, how should it be collected in a way that it keeps its live aspect? I mean, an idea, a memory, a moment.
Obviously there's a lot that depends on the work kind of itself and what it is. I mean, as you know, some works are collected to be restaged, as a live work. Others exist in video or as photographic kind of like stills. I think there's an incredible value to collecting performance, not only about kind of supporting the kind of artist community, the artists behind it, but to also capturing that material that may not yet be a focus for a museum or some other kind of collection or archive. We've seen throughout history, private collectors, become the custodians of a lot of incredibly important artworks before they were able to kind of become part of public institutions and et cetera. So in terms of live art, I think the conversation with the artists and the negotiation around what is possible within collecting it is really important, because of course you want to be respectful to the artists in the process and their practice, whilst at the same time finding a way to capture some element of it that can be shown, restaged, or simply exists as some kind of documentation of it. So it's no single answer again, I think, because it kind of depends on the artist and the artwork, but it's an incredibly exciting area for development, I think. And I think we're going to see a lot more quite fast-paced kind of development in the area of performance and performance collecting. And you already see it with museums in any case. I mean, Tate started a performance kind of like acquisition group, and MoMA and a few of the others are very actively kind of like doing work within the live art kind of like sector. I think it's, in terms of collectors, I think I love meeting collectors who collect performance, who are radically thinking about kind of this form of art making, and also supporting the sector, because performance is still widely undersupported, even though it's becoming increasingly popular. So we need collectors to buy the work, keep the artists living, encourage kind of museums to kind of stage the work and give some kind of validity to it in a way. And I think it comes from private individuals, really.
On the other hand, it has been on the main stage in many art events recently. Okay, we all know, for instance, Venice, the Golden, but for instance, last year in Art Basel, Alexander Preach's performance, it was the main thing of the whole week. And it was amazing, amazing. Once was not enough to be there. We were just going in and out from that tent. So it has been the main focus point of many art events all over the world.
Yeah, and still in terms of like the sustaining the sector, sustaining the art, it's just, you know, that hasn't happened yet. So we need more of these kinds of activities. There's more emphasis on artists like Alexandra and others. I mean, I was surprised that for Venice, I mean, despite the fact that yes, you had the Germany and Lithuania, you know, Golden Lion winning, also Alexandra's work in Romania Pavilion, I think in 2013 or something, it was a national pavilions, but the Biennale itself, that the international program, you know, the main theme had never really had a performance program. Or a focus. It had some performances, don't get me wrong. Tino Segal is, of course, you know, in one of the...
German, the first one was the German pavilion many years ago. It was unbelievable. It was the first time I saw it in a biennial. How many years ago, I forget.
But the Biennale itself, you know, like the international show, it has always like not necessarily had such a strong focus on it. Whereas the country pavilions have kind of led the way. So I think these are open doors, I hope. It's about, actually, to me, it's about supporting the artists who are doing the work. And that's kind of where we need the support from museums, the support from collectors to kind of keep it going.
Perfect. So this is the group for that.
I mean, I have to say, our first artist with SAHA was Ishil Ikritkabuk, you know, who works a lot with performance. So actually, in terms of SAHA and Delphina, a lot of the artists, probably half, if not more, have been artists who work with performance in some kind of way.
Yeah, we love the alliance we have, Aaron, with Delphina. Thank you. It's more than, you know, partnership. It's an alliance for us. Thank you so much.
It's a family. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Sena. It was wonderful hearing you. Thank you so much. Do we have other questions?
Yes, we do. I see Cezar's hand over there.
Great.
Hello, everyone. So as Perform Istanbul, we have an important question, because performance art is not only difficult to preserve and archive, but also to present it, to produce it is really difficult. So most of the performance projects that you shared today, they seem to be presented in a very institutionalized form, and also realized with important, meaningful financial resources. In Turkey, we have very limited sources, funds, institutions dedicated to visual arts, but also especially non-existing for performance art. So, and also institutions are not ready adapted to host performance art, especially long durational works. So we actively work in this field since 2016, and we are trying to deal with this issue. So what is the situation in the world according to your experience, and also how's your approach to long durational works in Delphina and to deinstitutionalizing it?
Very good question. And of course, I've been following your work for a long time, and we look forward to partnering kind of with you as well. That's one way in terms of kind of creating more muscle, is creating kind of networks of solidarity and collaboration, which we've tried to do a lot at Delphina with different institutions around the world. I did focus a lot on kind of like bigger kind of performances here. We've staged a lot of really small ones. I mean, a lot of the work that Mo Sat has done in Myanmar has been without kind of any budget, often pressing against kind of like state kind of censorship, which is why I want to show some of his work kind of first and foremost that we presented kind of here, kind of in London. But to kind of begin to kind of address kind of like your question, stage and performance, you know, is very particular. It requires, as you know, a lot of resource, a lot of consideration, not just for the performers, but also for the audience and for the context in which everyone's kind of working at the same time. And I have to say, even though I was able to realize this program in Venice, I was surprised at how inexperienced some members of the Biennale team were towards kind of performance, because they're not a producing body, the Biennale itself. The National Pavilions produce, you know, as it were. So it took a lot of energy to, even with them as a big institution, to make them kind of realize the kind of support that would be needed to the artists, and also a lot of consideration given to the audience, you know, around kind of performance. But in any case, looking at aside, looking at it in like a context, kind of like in like Turkey, like, you know, kind of Istanbul, we would be open to collaboration and helping to support and think through that. How, I mean, a lot of the artists that we work with, and that's of course our focus at Delfina, have been largely from kind of geopolitical South, where there's not a lot of resources. And that's why we made the theme performance as process to support those kinds of practitioners. Because we thought that actually, if we as the institution in the quote unquote West can in some kind of way help to kind of validate what they're doing, find support for what they're doing, strengthen kind of their capacity to work. And then when they go back home to their communities, they're able to kind of like share that knowledge. And that's kind of like the skill that we are imparting to them, and that a resource that we're able to kind of to also kind of like share. With institutions, it'd be interesting to kind of explore that with you, kind of Azra, about whether that could kind of exist. Yet and still, I feel your pain. Because we raise every single pound that for work that we do here in London, and also working with Block Universe on Sena's work, but also on a number of other performances. We know how difficult the difficulties that goes in terms of convincing private patrons, funders, to support kind of this kind of work. It's absolutely crucial that we work together and collaborate around it. So it's not a full answer to your question, but it's an invitation to keep talking about it. And maybe you can also respond. I'd like to hear you talk a bit more about the context of Istanbul too.
So was it a question to us?
It was an invitation for you to speak a little bit more about kind of like some of the, because you have SAHA right here with you. It's like, what kind of like experiences are you having at the moment?
I mean, SAHA is is one of the only supporter for the field. So of course their support is really important, and not only financially, but all their support for also gathering all independent organizations and uniting us. So what's the current situation? I mean, what we do is that we do a lot of dye for productions, and we try to find lots of sponsors for realizing our projects. And but we are also working we try to work in all the fields. Because we have also, we are working on an archive, on building an archive focused on performance art, but also in the same time, this year we started teaching in university performance art practices. In the same time, we are we are trying to also found our residency program focused on live art that we started this year with the fund given by British Council. So we try to use we have to be very flexible, and so we are trying to use all the opportunities that come to us. And yeah, we do not only as a platform represent performance artists and present performances, but we also take care of all the documentation and all the education of it. So this is, of course, we are a small team, and we are trying to do our best. But I think we started creating this community we have institutions like SAHA, but also we have many curators and artists that started supporting us, and which is, of course, very, very important, crucial for our work. And we also try to create this international network and try to connect the performance art community in the world. So that's why we also focused during the pandemic to create like a digital movement and invite all artists around the world. And we realized over 90 performances with 60 different artists from all around the world. So yeah, we try to be, I think the flexibility is like the most important word. And we also try to work on one-on-one performances, as well as trying to use like private spaces. We did, we presented performances in a curator's house. And also since the beginning, Simge's specialty is long durational work, and we're really also researching on how performance art can be collected and enter to collections in a way that we keep this live aspect. So last year we a re-performance right has entered a collection. So it was really exciting also for us. And then the year after, in Çanakkale Biennial, this work has been re-performed again. So the cycle just, turned. So, I mean, these news are also very exciting for us, and also how performance art is accepted now in the world, etc. So this is basically what we do.
No, it sounds great. It's also, it's wonderful that I think that as an institution, you're able to pivot kind of during a pandemic and find different ways to support kind of the sector at this kind of quite crucial time. Again, given the fact that with performance artists, all of the live activities were kind of like cut. So, it's then to kind of like move online. But then there's a whole other conversation about the payment of performance artists and even for works produced online, some artists weren't properly paid, and there's a whole other kind of thing about that. But kind of going back to kind of like our role at Delfina, I think we have taken on the institutional role because we realize that actually there's a strength that comes with us being able to kind of use our strength to open doors for others. So whether it's like for the individual artist or for another institution, and for us to kind of like use our reputation as much as we can to create opportunities for others. And that's kind of what we're all about. So we, I can't say that we focus specifically on like durational work or this. I can't answer all those specific questions because we work almost artist by artist, as it were, and it's kind of quite bespoke. But what we do try to do is, even though it's that kind of individual work, is think of the collective impact of it, which is what we're all trying to do here, kind of like today. We're all individuals kind of on this call. SAHA is made up of individuals, but it's the collective impact of what you do together. That's where the real difference kind of like comes out. I'm gonna hand back over to Zeynep.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, it was great to be with you, all of you, and I think it's sort of time to wrap it up. Erin, thank you so much for, taking the time to be with us and to share all this information, and further inviting Murat and Sena to share their experience at SAHA. It was wonderful to speak to you, as always. And really, thank you. And yeah, thank you so much. And just to quickly to add it as a note, so today was the last conversation that we were having on performance. So SAHA Talks will carry on exploring other mediums such as new media, photography, video in the coming months and weeks. So we'll keep you posted on that, alongside with all the links that we've shared today. So if you missed any, don't worry. Thank you so much, Erin, and thanks everyone for joining us.
So much, Erin. Thank you very much, Sena.
Thank you.
We missed you all. Thank you so much. I hope soon. Soon. Yeah, I hope soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Saha. Bye, Saha. Love to Saha.
Bye.
And
Thank you.
bye. Bye.